Let's hear firsthand how institutions have amplified their support for hybrid work, research and learning, how they've improved their online student services and unveiled an impressive suite of AV facilities across conference rooms, huddle rooms and classrooms. Your moderator for this session, Audiovisual Manager of Swinburne University and Technology and the President of AETM, Mr. Scott Doyle. Please make him welcome, everyone.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for attending this session. I hope you've attended lots of the tech talks. They're always a great part of our Integrate, and we'll make this one a memorable one as well. So just a very brief thing about me. I'm the AETM president, so I represent all the AV managers in education institutions in the Asia-Pacific region. That's K-12 and both universities. I'm also the AV manager at Swinburne University in Melbourne, Australia. And I'll let Grant introduce himself quickly.
Hello, Grant Bates. I work with Pereira Wilson Technology Consultants, head up education there, and mainly due to some lengthy experience at the University of Sydney client side.
Jared?
And Jared Wally. So I'm currently at Westan Australia, distributor, so product manager for Kramer Electronics there, but also looking after education nationally. My time in university was spent at Deakin Uni, running the audiovisual engineering team there for a number of years, and at the same time on the ATM committee with Scott and his fellow people.
John Paul.
Good day, everyone. My name is John Paul Posada. I work for the University of New South Wales. I'm the educational technologist for the Faculty of Engineering, and that role has delved deep into the AV field recently.
And Kathy.
Kathy Grattan. I work with Extron Australia, looking after education clients, the mixture of end users, consultants and integrators. That's both for higher ed and K-12. And so I sort of dealt with a lot of people in this room around the country. Prior to that, I came from a university where I was managing the AV department, and it does feel a little bit like we've come back home, seeing a bunch of University AV and AETM folk sitting on this panel. So yeah, it's nice to be amongst this group.
Well, thanks everybody, and in advance, thanks for your time. So as you can tell, we've actually got quite a broad range of experience in the university campus landscape. So please feel free, as we are going through some questions, to ask some questions yourself, because I think there's plenty to learn from these four esteemed colleagues of mine. So we'll start off with the first question. I'll make it nice and easy. We'll just maybe go down the row. So, Graham, what does modernising campus spaces mean to you, and why is it important in today's educational landscape?
I think I'll probably start with sort of the outside of technology answer to that. Modern campus spaces are needing to respond to modern student and organisation needs, right? So cost of living, cost of education is super relevant, with students needing to, juggle more jobs as they're studying. University's big business, so real estate management, attraction of students, particularly international students, and being a point of difference from other universities. So that's I think quite a modern need, and relates back to keeping up with technology and standing out. And then you have, I guess, education pathways into the workforce, I think is something that's more and more important, with people getting degrees and not sure about what the job that comes out of that degree is. So increase in vocational training and simulation, and I think technology can do a lot to support that. But I won't take up all the airtime.
And for you, Jared, I mean, you were at Deakin, but I know back then Deakin was actually going through a lot of transformation while you were there, especially down in Geelong. What was that experience like in modernising the Geelong campus?
Yeah, so I think when I arrived at Deakin, I remember our IT director took me around and showed me a lot of the spaces, the teaching spaces and meeting spaces alike. And over the years, what had occurred as we updated all those spaces, we had different integrators and different interfaces, different control systems. So the user experience for the students and the teachers alike was completely different depending on what building they were in and what room they were in. So the initial push there, and this started before I was at Deakin, was to start to roll out a common user experience across all of the campuses, not just for the students but and the teachers, but that's obviously the primary reason, but also for the support staff and building out so that we can actually maintain those spaces. So getting standards, not just hardware standards, but also software standards across those teaching spaces. So that was sort of stage one. And then we drove from there towards the end of my time with the engineering team looking into software-defined solutions and I guess more trying to drive the content delivery onto the enterprise network. And from that, which we'll probably talk about a little bit more later, really take a lot more out of the inputs that are going into those spaces. So who's pressing what button when, and what can we learn from that to help feedback and iterate the technology and the solutions that we're providing.
Thank you. And John Paul, as your role as educational technologist, what have you seen about the modernising campuses at UNSW?
Yeah, so it's an interesting time in the field, and it has been for a while, but since the pandemic, it's really sped up quite a bit in the sense that we were very much focused on delivering high quality content, both in room, physical spaces, but also online, and broadcasting that out. Sometimes doing it live stream, sometimes just doing recordings, and you see the evolution of that happening throughout the past decade or so, starting from just audio over PowerPoints to then video to then live streams. And then since the pandemic, it's all become hybrid style where you can run basically meetings with your online audience and in-room audience. And I think that that's currently the focus at a lot of spaces as far as trying to engage online audiences with the live in-room participation and content and making them feel like they're part of the space. And making the people in the room realize that there are also people online to converse with, collaborate, bring into the space, have them have their input and say. That's been a big focus of what we've been doing for the past year and a half. We designed a whole space around it, and I think it's going to continue to grow in that direction. I think the whole our society in general, I mean, we're all have flexibility as far as working at the office or working from home. Well, not everybody, but many people do. And I think students nowadays, with the cost of living and the cost of transport and everything affecting everybody, that's also impacting their desire to say, hey, listen, if I want to attend live, I'll attend live. But if I want to join online, I'm not going to lose out on anything if I do that. It's going to be the same quality. I'm going to be able to participate as I do in the class. And that's what we're trying to facilitate moving forward.
Thank you. And Kathy, it's been a while since UTS, but in your role as Extron's education rep, you're seeing lots of campuses and lots of new campus spaces. What does modernising the campus spaces mean to you, and a little bit of what Extron's doing in that area?
I think the key thing there is not a one size fits all answer. It depends what the university was doing prior to COVID, what they're doing now, and how, whether they're a G8 university, whether they're an ATN university, whether they were doing a lot of distance education privately, whether they're a small and regional campus, whether they've got a high dependence on international students. And a lot of those differences have really changed in the way that the university has operated in the past, like say 5 years ago, and is looking now. In the past, it was a much, yes, get people on campus. The whole sticky campus notion was come on campus for teaching, but also be there for informal learning, social, whatever. Now, we sort of had the past 5 years of let's suddenly address we need to be able to accommodate both modes of learning or delivery, and things were done very quickly. And it's almost now there's a time to reflect and go, we need to be able to address both ways of delivery, and we need to standardise on what we've been doing. We did a lot quickly with very little, and some of the things we did may not have been particularly desirable, but they addressed the need at the time. So it seems like now there's very much a time for reflection, standardisation, and also being far more flexible around the way that things are done. But I think, really stressing there isn't a consistent approach.
You kind of stole my segue there, but anyway, we'll keep going. But yeah, it was picking up on all four comments. And it's like between say 2008 and 2019, every university was all about social and informal learning spaces, which didn't involve technology. They're often built-in foyers. Some universities even decanted the classroom, took a wall down, and opened up the space just to have a nice social informal area for the students to come for that sticky campus. And now all of a sudden, it's all about technology, bringing those students to campus online as well. So, I guess I might actually start with John Paul for this one. So, in those spaces that you've done, how is the role of the technology involved? I guess I'd really over the last 3 or 4 years to transform those campus spaces and the environments to bring the students both in digitally and physically.
Yeah. So as we were saying before, it's not a one size fits all. So there are different activities that you do in different spaces, and that's what I'm trying to emphasize to the university right now, who is trying to plan a future strategy and a future campus strategy for addressing all these technological advances and the changes that we've had in society to adapt to the way that we're doing things now. But some of the things that I see that have been successful are changing the format of spaces, addressing the fact that we don't really make great use of very large spaces. So you have large lecture theaters that can sit 1,000 people. You don't have that many lectures that run 1,000 people all the time. So most of the time, that space is a waste of space. What we've done is, with the use of technology, we've introduced ways to shrink the space down and make coming into the space physically a higher commodity, make it a higher value. So we actually run a space that sits only 45 people, and classes that enroll in that space are so let's say 400, 500 students. We then have a kind of not a lottery, but you put your hand up to attend in person. If you miss out, you go to the next lecture. But it's kind of like driving up the value of being there physically. But then again, to attend online, you don't miss out because you really can just participate, raise your hand. We've changed the format of the space where the projector is not actually behind the lecturer, it's actually in front of the lecturer. So that serves as a confidence monitor to see what they're broadcasting, but also lets them see who's online. We're basically running Teams front row back there. When students participate in the room, their voice comes from the back just like they would if they were in a large lecture theater. If they want to, present something to the space, we can bring them to a monitor at the front of the space as well. Also, just the ease of use for a lecturer to operate in that space. We've introduced things like Windows Hello on all the devices that they need to log into in that space. So you put in your biometrics, whether it's your face or your thumbprint, you can log in like less than 5 seconds, as opposed to typing something in, then using two-factor authentication. Switching scenes, so switching cameras and angles is basically a touch button now instead of a menu that you drop down. So if I'm at the lectern podium and I'm facing that camera, I know I press one button, that camera comes on me. Press the other button, just touching it, and now I'm sharing my screen and the camera to the online audience. So it makes a big difference, these small changes. It makes a big difference to both the students in the room, but also the lecturers who use the space. And I think that those small changes that I'm talking about, like especially the projector in the back as a confidence monitor, the ease of use of switching scenes, the automation of having ceiling mics on for your in-room audience and bringing the online audience in, dealing with the audio in a very complex way but seamless to the users is key to making these spaces be successful and reproducible in other areas. So, yeah.
It's great. It's like, I think the key there is making it seamless, and that's, the hardest part for all of us. And I think Grant on that kind of role as well. And I know you do a lot of consulting in the education spaces. How do you see how the technology is involved, especially when you're engaging with either the school, the academics, or even the AV people about how they foresee their facilities going forward as well?
Yeah, I guess there's a few different stakeholders there to bring together, right? And often, I think anyone here with university experience understands sometimes the communication barriers between those departments. Sometimes it helps to have a third party come in and, all right, guys, we're booking a meeting and you're all coming into the same room. Tell us what you need. In terms of the user experience, yeah, like obviously I agree 100% that removing the friction and making it as simple for operators to use is important. I think probably during COVID, we got a bit carried away with the technology and sort of implemented spaces that almost needed an operator or somebody to manage the team system. So if you're having that stakeholder engagement and actually engaging with teaching and learning and academics, which are sometimes overlooked, we focus on students, which is great, but the people who develop the coursework and who have to deliver it are the ones who are going to be pressing those buttons, or ideally, button. So working with them to figure out what's working, what's not, is really important. And I guess as we progress, things like AI and automation might help with that. At the same time as getting those things right, I think we still got to focus on things like good audio in the room, recordings that are clear and well managed and searchable and indexed and all those things. So yeah, those are things that from the student and teaching perspective, I think really come through. And yeah, there's a lot more, I guess, to say when it comes to bridging the gap with facilities and properties and IT and support. They all need a seat at the table. Yeah.
Again, someone segued to my next question. You mentioned the word facilities. You're cheating. And Jared, I also wanted to touch but base with you now, but with Deakin, but also with your new hat on at West End, distributing so many different educational products. How do you see that, the integration of AV now into the classrooms and with other facilities?
Yeah, so I think part of stepping back a minute and part of the journey into these sort of interactive places with Deakin and how we use the technology and what technology we're going to implement. We spent a lot of time with particular groups, so that the teaching and learning team and some of the key players there, and so we had members of my team, some of which in this room at the moment, engage really heavily and actually spend time. We set up some test spaces, larger spaces, getting rid of some of the lecture theatres as well, and having more flat floor spaces to try and get some of that interaction in the hybrid environment. Spending a lot of time in there while classes were running, understanding what's working, what's not, and iterating that feedback. And then trying to implement the right technology, audio technology, microphones, trying to get a clear representation of the room, when the lecturer is talking, but then also when the group work is happening, when you've got students incoming on the far end, that's a difficult thing to get right. So that was one big challenge. We went through, quite a few different iterations of hardware and things to try and get that right. But I think probably part of the most important thing was engaging with the Deakin's user experience team and bringing them on board in our journey to say, can you go out and spend time? Here's an interface, because our previous interfaces have been written by people in the AV team and engineering. We know we need a button here and a button here and a button here, and that's going to make it all work. And the feedback when we actually did, we got the UX team to do an audit of a lot of the facilities and the lecturers there to see, well, how do you feel about the current interface and your engagement with it? And the overwhelming feedback was, terror. So many buttons. There was some of the people that spent a lot of time in there that were more comfortable than others. So when we moved to a sort of software-defined interface, we had a lot more control over how we could manage the usability of the interface and what we could do. We had a lot of user groups running, and we would then get feedback. So we'd sit down with the UX team and say, okay, well, how was that test? So, well, this works, but in this environment, we need feedback on these buttons to know when we're recording, to know when we're safe to talk freely, and those sorts of things. So that was a really important part of the journey and really valuable, because then we realized that we weren't just putting out what we thought was the right solution, but we knew that at least for all the people that were engaged, we had a better chance of getting it right. And I think the really difficult thing ongoing, we built a standard then, and that standard, all right, that's what we're going to do for the next 5 to 7 years, or maybe 10 if we get lazy and overwhelmed. I don't think that's enough anymore. I think that iteration, we need to work out how we continue to make that a more rapid process.
I remember coming out and visiting you at Deakin in Burwood and looking at the new user interface and hearing that story then, and I was really inspired, but my marketing team weren't so keen in committing resourcing to help us do it. So
it's really hard to get that feedback unless you have a team, like you had a UX team. That's amazing to go out and talk to people, get the feedback. You might hire somebody to do that, but it's still a point in time. I think a takeaway or a tip that I heard just yesterday, to get that feedback or gauging sentiment, jump on your university subreddit. It's something I hadn't considered, and it's definitely dirty data. Like it's not as clean or prime feedback as what you'd get from surveys and user groups. But as a quick check, like jump online and have a look and see what your students are actually asking, complaining about.
I can actually say that the DVC or the pro DVC education at UTS, most of her information was coming off looking at Facebook, Google, or looking at LinkedIn, looking at anything that mentioned UTS on social media from a student perspective, and she would engage with those students directly as well. Yeah.
So yeah, that's a common theme up here. So yeah, if you're not doing that, do that. Yeah. So it's really good to follow the students on Facebook. You'll find out that the escalators are never working, mostly, especially at Swinburne, but occasionally when those document cameras die too, they're very quick to complain about it. And you know about that before you actually get the ticket in the IT system. So I think, Kathy, over to you on this one. So with all the, you're out and about all the time, at so many education facilities, talking to AV and IT managers, what are you finding that how they're focusing on the best practices about integrate, AV and IT into and modernising their classrooms now? How are they thinking about best practice?
I think it's not just AV that's involved in those conversations, and it's sort of, I think from probably a lot of our time in universities in AV, we thought we were the be-all and end-all of what went on in that classroom. But now there's a lot more in terms of having to work with your facilities, having them understand why we've got a room of this size, why we've got this equipment in this room, what's its capabilities, and ensuring that flows on into future development, the way the space is timetabled, working with your service desk to ensure that managing the AV resources as a configuration management or whatever if you go down the RTL path, but just looking to see that they can fit in to that sort of framework as well, working with student services or student admin to make sure that timetabling also addresses what the students expect, that they're not running between campuses that are miles away and having bad timetabling, but there is the ability for them to have, video conferencing or calls between classes or be able to do it remotely, all those sort of things. So it's much, much broader than just AV is the juiciest part of the pie. We're part of it, but we need to fit in with everything else. And I think that's in the university experience. K-12 schools, and I was conscious we did have a K-12 panellist on here, but there are things there that are really being considered. There was a lot of discrete systems that would be used in the technology to run a K-12 classroom. And there's really a push now to try and bring those all together rather than have one person who is an IT person who may be looking after AV having to take on managing the EWIS part, managing the bells, managing the announcements, as well as managing all the IT and AV facilities in the school. So being able to streamline that in any way is probably one of the key things for our K-12 partners.
Yeah, no, we had a presentation at the K-12 conference yesterday that really showed about, all the different platforms you can use to manage AV and IT, and to start bringing those in together, it's like that's quite important. And probably Jared, going back to a little bit of time at Deakin, there was, you guys were on this new integration path of AV and buildings coming together. What challenges did you see when that process first kicked off?
So as we started implementing the content delivery over AV over IP, whenever I mention that, in a university space, more often than not, the comment is, oh, I've got to fight with the IT team. We were fortunate in that the AV engineering team and the network engineering team both reported to the same manager. So, we ended up working quite closely together. They were on board and actually quite excited at the excuse to upgrade uplinks from 10 meg to 10 gig to 40 gig because we got to push a lot of content across it. But what we found is as much as you think we've got a great network topology and it's working really well, as you implement a building, fantastic, we've got it sorted out. Now we move to the next building. Well, the topology is different. We've got switch stacks in different ends of the building, and how are we going to manage that? We have maybe a room that the network points are split over different switch stacks. So how are we going to manage that traffic? So there was a lot of learning and a lot of challenges along the way that we had to overcome. So that was, I guess, one big thing, and we worked well together. And if we couldn't, I don't think we would have been successful at all in the endeavour. And then I guess the software control side was the other thing that provided some challenges. So we moved from being a complete AMX house and controllers in every individual room to having a software control in a data centre. One based in the Geelong campus and one based in the Melbourne campus. So all of the rooms in Melbourne reported into Burwood, and all of the rooms around Geelong reported into Geelong. Eventually, with auto failover between the two, but not at the start. So when something did go wrong, it went wrong in a big way. So there was those challenges, and always when you're implementing new technology, not only are you facing challenges, but you tend to face a bit of pushback from the back end as well. You've got a support team who are, they're at the coalface. So when something goes wrong with the new technology, and they're getting bombarded with those calls, and they upset people, so you have to really work carefully and work really strongly with that team. So we certainly built a really good relationship by the end of it with the support team as well.
So we've got a bit technical here, a bit infrastructure here, but I did that for a reason, because without talking about best practices and integrating with facilities, we don't get to talk about the fun stuff, which is really modernising the campus spaces. Without that back end, we can't do the front end stuff for the students. So probably want to go to Grant here about, you've been doing a lot of engagement with ACU. Wanted to probably talk about some of the innovations that you've been discussing with the academics during the project scope, and then what some of the innovations actually then got deployed.
Yeah, Innovation Hub is the key one that comes to mind, right? So we worked on a project there that was based on a grant that was provided with quite a broad brief to develop an Innovation Hub, whatever that meant. So we had to engage with multiple departments of the health faculty and other faculties actually that were going to use this space. There was going to be 2 of them at different campuses. Interrogating how might you use this space? What could it look like? Here are some examples across best practice in the sector, and pulling those requirements together and really sort of thinking about how the space would be used in a sustainable way, and trying not to create sort of this white elephant thing. So part of that was integrating a typical standard teaching space into this whiz-bang innovation hub. It's immersive projection, you can do 360 videos and things, but if you needed to, you could still go in there as an academic and use the familiar touch panel interface and just present to a class. That's a recent example. I think something else that's coming up a lot is recording and production facilities. So whether it's live streaming or podcasting, but that sort of mid-tier facility to create content. Listening to I think it was an Avixa talk recently where they were discussing the constriction of the gap, or closing of the gap between, we're not looking for A grade or AAA production content necessarily, but people's expectations have increased. So they want the video and the audio to be clear, but also the capability has increased. So we've most departments and most students are going to be posting video to things like TikTok or Reels or whatever it is. So there's this kind of coming together of expectations have come down a little bit, but also up toward from what it was previously. So it doesn't need to be this that we were never going to achieve, but it does need to be better than it was. But also we've got the skill set and the technology to do this. So that ties all back into the modern needs we're talking about of people needing to study off campus and in their own time, so you can create that content. That's something I think that it is a bit of a growth space that we're reckoning with. How do you design these fairly simple push to record systems that allow teachers from different faculties to present all sorts of content.
And John Paul, you've already talked about this space. I think it was with 45 seats for students, and that. I'm kind of interested. Like the whole space is full of innovation. I think it's really interesting what you've done there. I guess my first question is like, what are how much in demand is those 45 seats? You did say they'll miss out if they don't book early enough, but the booking system, and are you getting 150 people booking to get into the space? Like, are the students really drawn to this innovative space?
So yeah, it varies. Like most courses, you have lecturers that are very engaging and people want to see them live and want to engage with them, and some lecturers are not the same way. So sometimes a class might book the space and they only have 30 people, so they don't have to worry about that. The classes that do have a lot of engagement and a lot of demand, it seems to have been working pretty well. This is the first year that we've actually opened it up to all of engineering, which is the biggest faculty at UNSW, but we've opened it up to other faculties as well. I run inductions for this space because it's not a space you're just going to walk in and boom, there you go. There's quite a few different cameras, quite a few different angles, quite a few different things you can do with the space. We simplified how these things are done, but you have to know that they're possible and you have to know how to make them work. As far as I've seen, the students that are using booking systems to access the space have not complained about not being able to get in the space. For the most part, I've just received a lot of praise and compliments for giving them the flexibility to not have to show up in person, and being able to either show up in person or not show up in person and not feel like they're missing out, because really the online experience is like light years away from what they're seeing in any other space that they've been in. They can sit in the back. They still don't turn their cameras on unless they're asked to or they want to. But they do use their voice to engage with the space, and they use the chat. And we've done something really interesting with the chat where the lecturer can see the chat in the back and can tell the students online that if they want their attention, they can at them. But we also repeat it on the slides in the front, on a front screen. So the students in the room don't have to join the Teams meeting from their devices to engage with the chat. And a lot of times the lecturer is doing something and the students online are posting, funny memes about the content that they're going on. And you hear the room just crack up. And then the lecturer is like, what's going on? And he looks at the chat. And it's just that little change that we did that really made a big difference between how the online students feel about being online versus being in the room. They really feel like they're part of the space. We're building a community of learners. They're engaging with the content, engaging with the lecturer, and it's been really successful so far. Even just a few weeks ago, so David Kellerman is the one that I worked with closely to build this space and design it. He's just recently had a baby. He had a guest speaker teach his class while he was with his wife and family, and he posted a picture of his newborn live in the class, and you could see everybody's and hear everybody's excitement when he posted it. And it was really an interesting way of how we've used that technology to be able to engage with people outside of the space, and you don't have to just be in the space, and it really makes the interactions that happen in that space quite special.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. That the online students. I really feel that a lot of attention needs to be paid to them. I'm interested to hear that you are spending time educating the educators, and it's really important for, I guess, students in this day and age to be able to have a job and some income while they might live an hour and a half from campus. So they can choose when they can work, they can choose when they learn. but the educators need to make this happen. So is it only just the one space you've got like that at the moment? Is there more grand plans to build more? And I know it's all in engineering at the moment, but are there other faculties looking at this kind of teaching as well?
So the vice chancellor and the executive board have looked at the space. They're really amazed with it. They've said that they want to build a few more spaces like it, at least 3. What David and I did was throw everything we had at it. You could pretty much do just about anything you want to do in there. And we tell people that you don't have to replicate the exact space. You have to replicate some of the design that we did. So we work closely with acoustic engineers and Steelcase and lighting, just to get everything right for as far as comfort goes in the space. But the format that I keep telling people to try to reproduce is that having the projector in the back. That's key for the speaker's engagement and to be confident of what they're broadcasting. Removing menus and touchscreens from the lecturer to have to use that to change their scenes and just making it a touch button. There's 2 buttons that people need to remember. 2 buttons in each section. There are a few other buttons, and once you get more used to the space and you understand what each option does, you start branching out and trying new things and trying different options. So it takes a little bit to get used to, but to get started in one go after one induction for 1 hour, you pretty much can use the space fairly easily. So I think there are plans to build more spaces like it. I hope that they follow that blueprint. As you guys have said before, in engaging with IT and the AV teams to standardize these things, that's going to be the challenge, because this is not a standard room. It runs off mainly NDI is the backbone of all the AV that happens in the space. We have our own switch. We have our own server room that runs the space. We leverage a TriCaster from NewTek to really create all the scenes. So standardizing something like that is not going to be an easy thing for people to do. But I think the format can be standardized with other technology, not necessarily using an $20,000 production tool for each space that we use. So.
Yeah, I've got to ask, I have seen pictures of the space. The students allowed to eat and drink in there? A lot of people will be wondering that.
We do, and students have been very respectful of the space. And since it's so small, it's really hard to just kind of treat it poorly, because it's smaller than this room. Yeah, everybody can be seen whatever they're doing. And people don't bring lunch in there, but we have a hot water tap in the back, and we let them have tea and hot chocolate and some instant coffee, and they love that. That's just a little basic thing we've done for a little space, and students really love that. But they've mostly treated it quite respectfully, because it's very different than any other space we have on campus. They can tell that we put a lot of effort and thought into how we designed the space, into the furniture that we used, and it's brand new. So for the most part, they're keeping it brand new.
Can I ask,
There you go for it.
with that space, it sounds like it's just a different approach, because when you're talking about the chat and having that up on the screen and memes being shared during class, I know a lot of people would read that as, well, that sounds like a distraction, but it seems to me like you're getting the payoff that is far better value in engagement.
We think so, but it does come down to the end user. Yeah. So if you have a lecturer who doesn't use Teams and doesn't like chat, it's not going to be as engaging. Some lecturers are kind of hesitant to try to use it. And we tell them, the chat is mostly for the students to converse with each other. And for the most part, they are conversing about the content. So students are asking questions about something that the lecturer just said, and other students are responding to them. And if there's something that can't be answered, that's when they at the lecturer or raise their hand. So they put their hands up even online. You can see on the back wall as well, if there are hands raised, and the lecturer can just stop and pause and say, all right, let me address that. And then that person could just speak out like they would in a normal class and be heard by everybody, and the question can be addressed right away. But it depends on the lecturer and their style of teaching. If you're a person who just likes to lecture, doesn't want to be participate in an active learning space,
Probably the wrong
then then that's probably not the room for you, but it might still be the room for you because you can let people engage with each other and just let them know, hey, listen, if you have any questions, I'll look at the chat afterwards and reply to you after the lecture is done. So
You've got 45 in the room. Is there a cap on how many you've got attending out? And is there a sort of ideal number to work with in terms of students?
the cap for the cap is the Teams meeting cap.
Yep.
So I think right now it's like, I don't know, 10,000 or something. It's huge. So we haven't reached that.
In terms of something that's manageable and the way that you're using the space?
So it really does depend on how you're using the space. If you plan it to be a very active learning space, you have to plan out exactly when you're going to pause to address questions or when you're going to pause to see if there are any questions. Because if you just open it up and you have 500 people online and you say, just ask a question anytime, it could potentially be a disaster. You might not get through the whole lecture. So these are things that we're trying to, train our lecturers that engage with the space on how to properly use it. And we've done this even before we had the space. So before we had the space, I provide tools like polling tools where people can ask questions and see how people are going through the content so far. But you have to plan and time that. So you have to put a slide in for your poll, and you have to give some time to wait for responses to come in and then address the responses. That's the same thing with this space. So if you plan for pauses and plan for questions and answering those questions, you'll be pretty successful in using it.
Want to leave some time for questions, but I do sort of have one more question for Kathy and probably Jared as well. You both being educational reps in your roles, you're probably getting a lot of phone calls from AV managers, IT managers about standardizing, as John Paul just talked about. What are the challenges you're hearing about? We need to be building these spaces, synchronous and asynchronous, but we need to make sure it's standardized and we can repeat it over the campus. What challenges are you hearing that are coming from those phone calls?
To be honest, the standards are there in terms of the functionality, and this is a difficult one, and Jared will probably agree as a vendor, the standards are not necessarily there in terms of the product that's being selected. And there's been a very definite shift away from, we will stick with using X brand. I think there's two pushes for that. IT was very, very they've always had an approach of managing their risk and having multiple suppliers or multiple sources of equipment. And I think when we've had stock delays or shortages over the last few years, that's moved to AV departments. Don't just put all your eggs in one basket, work with multiple vendors. And that's very much an approach that's been there. But there's also been, I think that's also opened up where people have had to move to something because their known go-tos weren't available. They've kind of branched out. I don't need to stick with that standard. I'm going to look for what works for me and what meets this requirement. So I think the key thing is standard in functionality.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. Part of our move at Deakin away from a manufacturer-defined standard, what was that in part, as well as cost, I guess. As you start to approach larger rooms, I think as I left Deakin, we're approaching 1,000 spaces with technology. It's really difficult to maintain a reasonable refresh time when you're spending that much money in each individual room. As we moved into the more software-defined solution, we found that the first touch panel that we used, we had issues with. Well, we didn't have to throw the whole solution out. We could just replace that panel because we were using standards-based solutions. That not only helped with those issues, but also reduced the overall costs. But I'm seeing the same thing out there as well. The hardware standards is difficult. So while you want to diversify your options so that you're not stuck without a hardware piece that's critical to your solution, you also don't want to have to maintain spares of 10 variants of the same type of thing, because that's far too costly on the support team and your operational budgets. I had a similar chat with some members of Defence last night. So a gentleman's just moved from IT to take over the AV in Defence. He says, now I've got to standardise things. And the other challenge that he's found that I think probably a lot of universities are still dealing with is that not everyone, the AV is not centralized. So at Deakin we centralized, and it took some fighting so that we were the owners of the AV fleet. But before that, and it's probably the same, a lot of people same in the room, you might have the faculties are the owners of these things. So you also have to work with them and try and convince them that to come on board for standardization. And until you can do that, it's very difficult to provide the same user experience for your staff. Yeah.
And just to add to that and close, but want to open up to some questions. Sometimes user experience and functionality also needs to go all the way down to the IT support teams. So you might have different kit, but that functionality and that support functionality needs to be very similar too, especially when you're getting support from non-AV technicians as well. So there hasn't been any questions on the live chat, but these guys are full of knowledge and it's been really interesting so far. Is there any questions from the floor? I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see. Yeah, go for it.
Oh, that's okay.
Technology has failed. I probably pressed the wrong button.
That's okay.
Sorry.
So thanks for today's a lot of great information. I come from a K-12 background, so not university. How can you see K-12 campuses modernizing themselves to increase user experience in some of the same ways that universities do, but often on a significantly tighter budget? People kind of tend to demand the world in K-12 on a budget of, maybe $5,000 or $6,000 for a room, which a lot of the time isn't realistic to do, hybrid learning. But how do you see in some of the spaces where you might be able to do a hybrid learning space, K-12 doing that in a realistic way?
I'll let you guys think about that. I'll get someone to answer it in a second. But I do also want to point out that some independent schools have more money than universities do.
I was about to say, to be honest, some of the K-12 spaces I've looked at, I've gone, whoa, this is far superior than some of our university spaces, but I appreciate that is not the experience for all. In terms of what I've seen that has been effective there, a lot of not just focusing on the classroom, but taking on board what's happened in universities where you had the informal learning spaces, you actually expanded. The students can use anywhere. There's lounges, there's tiered seating, there's places where students can go in and have a meeting. There's team spaces available to students. And that kind of has opened up the way that the technology has been used and adapted and brought in. It's like I'm preparing something for an assignment. Recording and streaming is another big thing, and you're having to submit some sort of production piece. Being able to do that and produce it in your school area has also really helped. I mean, yeah, people were doing it on their phones, but it's taken it to a new level. And I just think, not just keeping it all in the classroom has been a really key takeaway I've picked up from looking at the K-12 school space.
I think so before coming to West End, I didn't have a lot to do with the K-12 space, but that's really something that's opened for me. And in my visits to a lot of schools, a real eye-opener has been the requirement for staff for managing students. One particular school I went to, they hire 3 people, and effectively that's those staff jobs is to manage students coming and going from classrooms, and Bobby's mum's come to pick him up. Where is he? Go and grab him. In each of their teaching spaces, there is a display, and there was software on that display. And one of the functionalities that they weren't using was a functionality where the admin staff can send a message to a particular teaching space via that software and pop up a message. So the realization of that, we don't have to, number one, put a call out over the entire school for Bobby, or send someone directly to the classroom, so we're not disrupting teaching everywhere. We can just send a message directly to that display. So I think software in the teaching spaces, and having, from a support point of view, management software on those hardware devices will be a big thing that you can start to really tie all those spaces together, so they're not just individual pieces of technology anymore.
Another one that's kind of, I guess, a hack. It's not an answer to getting this technology in your spaces, but potentially sharing and reaching out to other sister schools or universities and having partnerships there where you can come into, a space like JP's and try that out, and give the students and your teachers a taste of what that looks like. I think there's definite appetite for those sorts of programs to cross, particularly with seniors, to the lower university years.
And we have another question over here, I believe.
Yeah, I'm ex-deacon as well. Used to work with Jared, and now I'm in consulting. One of the things that I saw when I was there, and I guess it's something that every organisation that upgrades their systems and their tech has to deal with, is the life cycle and where the equipment goes when it gets swapped out, because some of this equipment can still be used. I attended the talk yesterday on sustainability, and one of the things that was being bounced around was like a boomerang program for like the suppliers and the vendors to take back equipment that could potentially still be used, but maybe somewhere else. I just want to get some views on that in terms of what happens, because I know that obviously there's e-waste and there's companies that do e-waste, but it's actually, what does that company do with that e-waste? Do they just crush it up? Do they just send it to another country? I guess there's that cradle to grave question as well, that I think there's some responsibility there for particularly higher education and the vendors as well to deal with. Thanks.
Anyone want to tackle that one? Or Grant?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I think we've probably got to do better as an industry to push that and to push our manufacturers with things like buyback schemes. And that can come from, if we're doing a standards review at an organisation and coming up and trying to pick, even if it's a couple of different manufacturers, having that element and the whole ESG piece pretty high up on the evaluation criteria is something we can do from a design perspective. And yeah, you mentioned e-waste. There's some e-waste is better than others, right? And different providers. So really digging into who you're partnering with and what they are doing with the equipment. Probably the other approach is putting in less and what you put in. And there are definitely solutions out there that push the idea that it's a scalable software-based solution where you're getting new and different functionality over the years through firmware upgrades, so your equipment lasts longer for you. I guess those are the main ways that we can try, but I think as a whole, got to push a bit harder.
And in closing, I'll just make one comment on that too. At my organisation, it's reuse, repurpose, recycle. As soon as I have a large inventory of old stock sitting in storerooms that I really love to try to get back out there. But eventually, when we do e-waste, we e-waste with social impact in mind, and especially providers that are employing people with disabilities and so forth. So we try to do the best we can. But unfortunately, with life cycle products and products going end of life as well, sometimes we're left with some dead weight essentially. The time is up. I'm going to thank our great panel here today. Lots of great insights from you all. I really appreciate your time, and for everybody for attending, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your show.
Thank you.